Somewhere in central Illinois, there is a line you cannot see. It cuts through roads and cornfields and backyards without a single sign to mark it. For almost 60 years, one of the largest restaurant brands on earth has been free to cross that line. But its name has not. On one side, an empire. On the other, a single hamburger stand, named by a woman finishing her husband's sentence. This is the story of two people who chose a name without knowing anyone else had it, and a court that had to decide how far that name was allowed to travel. You're the jury. This is the case of the king in the cage. Mattoon, Illinois. 20,000 people, a telephone factory and weather that runs the whole town's calendar. In 1952, a young man named Gene Hoots buys a little soft-serve stand off his uncle. It already has a name, painted over the window, the Frigid Queen. It was a summer business, so seasonal that every winter Gene practically buried it. When the cold came, he pulled a tarp over the Frigid Queen and went looking for enough work to make it back to spring. He wasn't building an empire. He was keeping one small thing alive until the weather let go. The men from the telephone factory wanted more than ice cream. They wanted something hot. So in 1954, Gene put in a griddle and then hamburgers. By 1957, the little stand had earned a new building, and it needed a new name. A handyman had an idea, something loud to pull cars off the highway. He wanted to call it the Hot Dames. Gene said no. This was Mattoon. Then Betty looked at the name already over the window, the Queen, and at her tired husband, and she solved it with the plainest logic in the world. You already have a queen, she said. A queen needs a king. The handyman had reached for attention. Betty simply completed the logic already painted over the window. Up it went on the new building. Burger King. A tiny coronation nobody standing there knew was history. Then his uncle gave him the kind of advice you give while squinting at a fresh sign. Not a speech, just, you ought to register that. In July 1959, Gene and Betty put their name on paper with the state of Illinois. And here is the thing the law would one day care about most. They did it without ever having heard of anyone else called Burger King. They weren't copying. They were first there, and they meant to stay put. Because hundreds of miles to the southeast, another Burger King had already learned to multiply. In Florida, there were two men, a flame grill, and an appetite for the whole country. In Mattoon, Burger King was a place, directions you'd give a stranger. In Florida, it was becoming a system. It didn't have a queen, it had the Whopper, and it was hungry. 15 restaurants in 1955, 29 in 1956, 38 in 1957. The same two words on building after building until they stopped being words and became a brand. And then the system turned north. July 1961. The chain crosses into Illinois up in Skokie near Chicago. And it crossed knowing exactly what was waiting downstate. Its lawyers had already seen the Hoots' Illinois registration. It came anyway. Then October 1961, the chain was granted the federal trademark to the name Burger King. 2 dates. Hold on to the order. The Mattoon stand never moved, but the map around it filled in. By the time this reached a courtroom, more than 50 of the chain's restaurants stood in Illinois, and one of them opened in Champaign, about 45 miles up the road. That's when it stopped being abstract. Gene's customers had now seen the other Burger King, the famous one, up the highway. He had used the name first, but he began to fear that in his own town, he'd be the one who looked like the copy. So Gene did the thing that would haunt him. He tried to grow. In 1962, he opened a second restaurant in nearby Charleston, but the federal registration had issued the year before. Whatever Gene personally knew, the law treated him as knowing. That new restaurant could not earn him any new territory beyond the market he had already built. Then a lawyer gave Gene the most dangerous sentence in this story. "They can't do that," he said, "without your permission." Finally, someone who understood the rules. Gene and Betty sued the chain to keep the name Burger King out of Illinois. Not out of Mattoon, out of the whole state. And then the machine turned. The corporation answered with its own lawsuit in federal court on its own ground. And when that case landed, the caption had flipped. The couple who filed first were now the defendants. Gene went to court to push a company out of his state. By the end, he was the one being asked to justify his own front door. Strip away the law because this is where you come in. On one side, two people who picked the name on their own without notice of anyone and used it first. On the other, a company that had used it years earlier, made it famous, and held the federal mark. And here's what makes it hard. No one ever proved a single customer was actually confused. This was never about a lie. The Hootses had the stronger claim to the past. The corporation had the stronger claim to the future. And the Hootses hadn't asked for Mattoon. They'd asked for the whole state. So if you're on that bench, what do you protect? The ones who were first or the ones the whole country now knew? Give me your ruling. Then watch what the court actually did. I promise you didn't guess it. 7 years earlier, an uncle had said, "You ought to register that." Now a federal court had to decide something stranger. Not who owned the name, but how far it had really traveled from one little stand. The court found that Gene and Betty Hoots could keep the name. Burger King was theirs, but only as far as they had truly earned it. The court set its point on their restaurant in Mattoon, opened the compass, and, in the words of the ruling, drew a circle having a radius of 20 miles. Inside that line, the name was theirs, and the empire, with all its federal power, could not call itself Burger King. And then the other edge of the blade. Everywhere else in Illinois, the name belonged to the chain. The family had asked for a state and been handed 20 miles. Their second stand in Charleston gave them no additional territory, and Gene and Betty could never carry their Burger King 1 foot past the border the court had drawn around them. The judge didn't crown one king, he divided the kingdom. He saved their name the way glass saves a museum piece, by keeping it perfect and keeping it from ever going anywhere. And to be exact, the company was never banished from those 20 miles. It could build there, sell burgers there. It simply could not say its own name out loud inside the circle. As for Gene, inside his little kingdom, he couldn't sell the chain's famous Whopper. Gene's own quarter-pound burger had another name, the Hooter. Part joke, part refusal to disappear. The years went by. The chain became one of the biggest names on the planet, on highways, in airports, in countries Gene would never see. Gene once threw a tarp over his stand every winter, never sure the little thing would survive to spring. It outlived every winter he ever feared. By the end of 2025, Burger King had nearly 20,000 restaurants. The Hoots' stand never became a chain, but almost 60 years after the court drew its line, the name Burger King still stops at the edge of one 20-mile circle in Illinois. The chain crossed oceans. Its name still cannot enter Mattoon. Betty gave the queen a king, and the court gave the king a kingdom, 20 miles wide,